Good morning. My name is Bob Darrell, and I am alcoholic.
Hey, Bob.
Would you join me in a moment of silence, and I'll open with a prayer. Lord, help me to set aside everything I think I know about you, everything I think I know about myself, everything I think I know about others, and everything I think I know about my own program of recovery, all for a new experience in you, Lord, a new experience in myself, a new experience in others, and a new experience in this program of recovery. Amen. If there's anybody here in the middle of your writing your resentment inventory, you might want to volunteer for security. I'm sure you would do a good job. We're going to start talking a little bit about turning the juice on. And in order to turn the juice on, you have to come to believe that the juice is there and start positioning yourself as if it is. And the second step deals a lot with not so much accessing God or understanding God, or even really that much to do with believing in God, even though that's the end result. It has to do with laying aside prejudice and jettisoning and letting go of old ideas and taking the actions of such. There's an old Buddhist proverb that is a vision of enlightenment, and their vision of enlightenment. It's about this little old Chinese farmer who's very old and very wise, and he lives with his only son on this meager piece of land that is owned by a lord, and he doesn't own the house he lives in. He doesn't own the tools he works the fields with. He works hard and doesn't even own the crop. He has to give a good portion of it to the Lord for the privilege of working hard in these fields. And he owns one thing. It's his whole estate. It's the only thing he owns, and that's a horse. And one day, the horse runs off. And he'd virtually lost everything he owned. And his friends and family and neighbors come over to console him, to tell him how horrible it is that he lost everything he owned, virtually. And the little old man just shrugs his shoulders and says, I don't know if it's awful. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. And they look at him like, you don't think you lost everything you own? You don't think that's bad? And he said, I don't know. Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. A few days later, his son is standing out by the corral, and all of a sudden, down the valley comes the horse, and it's leading a whole herd of wild horses right into the corral. The son's just standing there, just closes the gate, and the man now is the richest man in the valley. He's hit the horse lottery. And naturally, his friends and family and neighbors come over to congratulate him, to tell him how great this is, how good this is, how wonderful this is. And he just shrugs his shoulders and says, I don't know if it's good. Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. And they look at him like, you're smoking something or something. I don't know. You don't think it's good? You're now the richest man in the valley. He just says, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. A few days later, his only son is trying to break one of the wild horses, and he's thrown, and he's crippled up pretty good, and his leg is mangled up pretty bad. And of course, his friends and his family and neighbors come over to console him, to tell him how horrible this is, that his only son has been crippled up like this. And he just shrugs his shoulders and says, I don't know if it's bad. Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. And they look at him aghast, like, how... This is your only son, and his leg's mangled up, and you don't even think that's bad. And he just keeps saying, I don't know. Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. About a week later, the Chinese army would come through the valley and force all the young men to fight in a battle where none of them would survive. And they couldn't take the son because of his leg. And the old man knew the most important thing he would ever know is that he doesn't know. And this is an insight into the enemy. And the enemy is that part of you that thinks it knows. That part of you that thinks it's all of that in a bag of chips. That part of you that's right a lot. The part of you that judges. And if you're like me, it's not really judging. You're just noticing accurately. I've been watching some of you. There's some accurate noticers in here, I've noticed. Because I'm a noticer, and noticers notice noticers. Takes one to know one. And if I could just have enough ego reduction to know that I don't know. And we are going to be reminded about this throughout the whole process of the steps and throughout the whole book. When we're reminded to constantly remind ourselves we're no longer running the show, thy will, not mine, be done. That we don't know. We're not God. Which is, I think, the great shame of the universe, that I'm not. But I'm not. And you should thank God I'm not, because I'd be changing some of you. As you would be changing me, I'm sure, if you were God. So we're coming at this thing with trying to have an open mind. The three essentials in recovery are honesty, and I must be honest about the nature of my condition and the hopelessness of this malady. Open-mindedness. Am I willing to entertain a possibility that I don't believe in? And willingness, am I willing to act as if this thing will work for me? And that brings us to page 44, and I'm going to try to remember to mention page numbers. I'm not always. I know some of you will find this hard to believe. I'm a tad self-centered, and I get wrapped up in what I'm doing and forget. Sometimes it's just me. I'm the only one in the room, it seems like. It's. But I'm going to try to remember to mention page numbers. On page 44, the fourth line down, it sort of reiterates the nature of the beast. It talks about two aspects that make alcoholism terminal and fatal. If you have both of these, if you have one of these, you may have them both and don't know it. So the book gives you an out. It says, or. Do you have either one of these? Because most of us get here, and it takes us a while to see both of them because of our own delusion. But I have both of these, and that's what makes me a chronic alcoholic. And so the first thing, it says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. Well, what do they mean by entirely? I mean entirely. What about marijuana? It's organic. What about pills from a doctor? What about light beer? Something? I could not quit entirely. I could quit drinking alcohol for long periods of time if you gave me a lot of medications and drugs. But I could not quit entirely because of the ism of alcoholism. See, I'm an alcoholic. You take away the alcohol, I'm left with the ick. I can't quit entirely. And the periods of time where I've tried, it feels like I'm doing time. And it's not good. I don't suffer abstinence well. And then the second thing, it says, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take. And then it goes on to say, if that be the case, you're screwed, pretty much. I am compelled to keep trying something that just hurts me and doesn't work. And I can't stop myself from starting. It's a hideous, hideous thing. And then the book says down a few lines, it says, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels he is an atheist or an agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. It did to me. I remember I was at a meeting in Mother Seton Hospital in Waterville, Maine, when one of my more back to nature geographics up there, and I was went to a meeting in the hospital as a patient that was brought in by trustees from Thomaston State Penitentiary, a place that I was going to end up being in danger of going to shortly. And there was a speaker there who was a convict, and he was now by this time I'd been to a lot of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings throughout Pennsylvania, but I had never seen or heard anybody in AA like this man. He was an outlaw motorcycle guy covered with tattoos. Now, back in these days, tattoos were not chic. Only convicts had tattoos, and they were the blue ink jail tattoos. And he had arms on him like this, like he must have been pumping iron in that yard 8 hours a day for about 10 years. And this guy was just buffed out, tough guy, long hair, beard. I had long hair and a beard. I was kind of left over from Woodstock. And he was the first guy in Alcoholics Anonymous I ever saw that I thought I could drink with this guy. Most of the people in AA, to me, looked like they might have had a martini too many on the golf course, said something embarrassing to their boss, and went to AA for better business connections or something. You know, they looked like them. You know who them are, the square people. But this guy looked like a guy. He was a tough guy, too. He talked about carrying a shotgun and pistol whipping people. And then he started getting personal, and he started talking about some stuff that was very secret to me. The way he'd come to in the morning shaking and feeling like a scared little boy. And he's saying that, and I'm thinking, this tough guy's like that. And I'm starting to identify with this guy. And he talks about finding Alcoholics Anonymous in prison. And I'm about ready to join, because I like this guy. And then he says he came to AA, and AA helped him find God. And the minute he said that, it was like this door slammed in my head, and I thought, oh, what have they done to him? Oh, my God, he's a sunbeam for Jesus. Oh, no, not him. Oh, he's cool. They can't do that to him. I felt sorry for him. I remember kind of thinking, oh, my God, I'd rather die than be like that. I almost did. I didn't think I couldn't face God. I puffed myself up with a lot of intellectual crap telling you how God cannot exist. I was a wannabe atheist. I wasn't really an atheist. I couldn't be religious enough about my atheism. And to be a really good atheist, you have to be very religious about it. I couldn't do that. What I really and truly, what I was a guy that was afraid of God. I was a guy that as a very young kid in a religious school only heard the negative, and I could not hear the positive, because I'm listening with the mind of a chronic alcoholic, a mind that's fear-based and self-involved. And I only heard the negative. I didn't hear about a God of love. I didn't hear any of that. And I know the other kids must have, because they still go to that same church and they're good with it. I heard about a God who seemed to exist to judge me. And he could see in the dark, which is not good for a guy like me. I do my best work in the dark. He could read my mind, which is hideous. Oh, I got two movies that go through my head. One's sex and the other one's violence. I mean, I'll be driving in my car. I'll kill him. I'll do her. I'll kill him. I've got, like, I'm just in the car by myself gaining thousands of years in purgatory, right? And I haven't even done nothing, right? And I just know I am flawed and stained in a way beyond God. I just knew it. So when you talk to me about God, it's like I'll bluster about how intellectually about how there is no God. But the real truth is I'm the kind of guy that if I just suspect, even to this day, that you don't like me, I'm going to not like you first. And that's what I did with God. I was afraid. I'm not going to be good enough. So I threw him out. And I've done that with people. I've done that with people in AA. Just from your body language, my head just goes, oh, he doesn't like you. He doesn't even know I'm there. I'll go 6 months later, I'm still talking crap about you because you sat funny in a meeting or something. Jeez. Sometimes it's hard being me. So, as the book talks about, I am full of all these doubts and prejudices. And the book has to face me with the truth. And on the first full paragraph on page 45, it gets to the crux of the problem. It says lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how are we to find that power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable me to find a power greater than myself, which will solve my problem. What's my problem? That I can't drink? No, that I can't live without it. I really and truly have more than an alcohol problem. I got a sobriety problem. If you just have an alcohol problem, you only need a one-step program recovery. Step 1, don't drink. Your problem's solved. But if you're like me and all other chronic alcoholics, when you enter into a state of abstinence, your emotions start having their way with you. If you're like me, you're restless, you're irritable, you're discontent. On page 52, it kind of talks about me when I quit drinking. In the middle of the page, right square in the middle, it starts these symptoms of a spiritual malady that drives me insane, back to drinking again. Symptom number 1, having trouble with personal relationships. I don't know about up in this part of the country. When I come from, that's a big issue. It's not that we have a problem with personal relationships. We wouldn't if we could get them to mind. We can't control our emotional natures. I was so bad when I first got sober that some guy in AA gave me these stick-on buttons that you put on the dashboard of your car. One of them said flamethrower. The other one said grenades. The other one was machine gun. Because I get so uptight in traffic. He said, just pretend you're blowing other cars up. It might help. And we were a prey to misery and depression. Depression is a symptom of untreated alcoholism. It's not necessarily a symptom of a Prozac deficiency. We couldn't make a living. I went through jobs like a guy with hay fever goes through Kleenex. I can't stick. I was sober 5 years before I got to the first place in my life where I was ever at a job long enough to have a vacation. I was 5 years sober before I got to that. And that's all the drinking years and the first 5 years of my sobriety. Had a feeling of uselessness. Oh my God, all my life. I think one of the great attractions of the whole late 60s, early 70s hippie movement is people were talking about finding themselves. When you're really lost, that's very attractive. Like that feeling, what's my life about? What am I supposed to do? What's it all mean? This uselessness, this disconnect from life itself. We're full of fear. I'm the guy sober. I just wake up afraid. I don't know why. I wake up afraid sometimes and nobody's even done nothing to me. I just wake up with a feeling that some crap's going to happen. You know what I mean? I don't know what, but I just know it's going to happen today. So what's happened? You're on high alert all day long. So by the time I go to an 8:30 meeting at night, I'm worn out. People say, "How you doing, Bob?" I go, I've been stuck up in here all day. It's like being trapped in a van full of 8-year-olds that are all overdosed on sugar and none of them like you. It's just, by the end of the day, I'm just worn out. Full of fear, worry all the time. I don't even know that worry's fear. I don't know that the apprehension I walk around with and the anxiety is actually fear. I don't know that all my guilt is fear of the consequences of my past. The book says we're driven by 100 forms of it. I'm riddled with it and don't know it. Silkworth says something in his story that is amazing to me. And it's not just about drinking. It's about my whole existence as an alcoholic. He says, to us, our alcoholic life seems the only normal one. This uncanny thing inside of me, no matter how bizarre I am, no matter how sick I am, no matter how twisted my perception is that I just somehow make it normal. As if I believe, as if it's normal to wake up afraid and worry all the time, live in your head. As if I must secretly suspect that neurosis is normal. And I live with fear. And I adjust to it. And I worry a lot. I'm always solving problems that haven't occurred yet. Clearing up the wreckage of my future continually. Isn't it odd? Is it, some of you will get this. Isn't it odd when you're expecting bad stuff to happen, you magnetize it and you bring it to you? People who go through life expecting crap to happen have a lot of crap happen as we interface with reality. We were unhappy and we couldn't be of real help to other people. That's a pretty good description of me, sober. So when it says that lack of power really is my dilemma, and it's more than the power to not drink, it's the power, I had to find a power by which I could live. I don't have the power to free myself of myself. It says that later on in chapter 5 when it talks about we must be rid of this selfishness, we must, or it kills us. And then it goes on, oh, by the way, you can't. You had to have God's help. It says the same thing about resentments. Can't wish them away any more than alcohol. It's the same thing about all my defects of character. I can't fix myself. I have to have God's help. So we're looking, it's more than just the power not to drink. I need the power to live, to come outside myself, to get free, to interface with life and people, to connect in this loneliness that is untreated alcoholism. And that's the bitter part of alcoholism, is the loneliness. The feeling of separateness and Bill uses a word in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions that just resonates with me. He calls it a feeling of anxious apartness. As if I'm anxiously and lonely driven on the one side of a glass barrier with my nose pressed up to it, watching all the other people on the other side play and live. And then there's me. And the only thing that ever made that barrier go away was in the early days of my drinking. 4 shots of tequila and the gates of this self-imposed hell would open and I would be free. And the loneliness would go away as I connected with you and became a part of. So I need the power to live. This is a place where it seems we lose a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous because they're so, as so many of us are, they're so God resistant that once that goes away and they're no longer God resistant and they're willing to believe, they think they've arrived somewhere. That is only the very, very beginning. The very beginning. And yet, because they have a sense of breaking through the God resistance barrier of all their prejudices, they think they arrive. So they start bleeding themselves out of Alcoholics Anonymous. They never go through the rest of the process and maybe join a church. Nothing wrong with church. Church is great. The book even says a lot of us return to the church of our childhood. It's nothing wrong with that. It's just not a treatment for alcoholism. It's an enhancement. It's a great addition. But God would not have divinely created Alcoholics Anonymous if there would have been a solution for us in church, medicine, or psychiatry. Matter of fact, when you look around Alcoholics Anonymous, what do you see? I mean, we are all the church, therapy, and medicine failures. I mean, we end up here. I mean, that's... I did a workshop one time on step 2, and it was about 80 people in the room, and just on a fluke, I asked for a show of hands of the people who had spiritual experiences or were saved or born again and then drank after that experience. About a third of the room raised their hand. William James talks about that in Varieties of Religious Experience, about how these conversion experiences often are so transitory. Thibault talks about how there are amazing recuperative powers of the alcoholic ego. You can be connected with God. Oh my God, I need a tent and a tambourine. And a week later, I'm back into the guy who's playing God rather than serving God. And I don't know it because I think I'm right. So, lack of power really and truly is my dilemma. I've had the experience to sponsor several men of the cloth over the years, and of the 4 guys I've had the opportunity to work with from time to time, 2 of them drank themselves to death. And I remember when Frank relapsed. I wasn't the only guy. A lot of people had tried to help him. He was a good guy. Everybody loved him. This is a great priest. He's not a deviant guy. He's just a man who wanted to serve God in his church. That's all. But he had alcoholism. And he called me up. He was back to drinking, and he was sobbing into the phone because he couldn't understand why a man who served his church and served God could ask God to keep him sober, and he was drinking again. And there were prostitutes and drug dealers and the dregs of the earth in AA staying sober, and it didn't seem fair to him. And it didn't seem right to me either, because I knew I was sober through God's grace, and if that's the truth, then you would think a guy like Frank, who would have a leg up on a bum like me. I mean, he prayed more in one day than most of us pray in a week. He read more spiritual literature in one day than most of us read in a week. And yet he literally drank himself to death. They found him about a week later. Asphyxia, just one of those deals where you drank yourself to a coma and you throw up while you're passed out and you drowned in your own vomit. We don't die pretty. And I remember when he died, I couldn't believe it. I was in shock. But see, Frank's problem wasn't lack of faith. He had a tremendous faith in God. He could go for hours explaining to you why God exists and all the intricacies of grace and prayer. But lack of faith wasn't his dilemma. Lack of religion wasn't his dilemma. It was lack of power. We talk in Alcoholics Anonymous about something that's a little different. We talk about conscious contact. And there's a big difference between faith and conscious contact. When you all leave here tonight or today or whenever you leave here, you'll get in your cars and you'll drive out on the road. And you'll get on the road with an absolute faith that there are traffic laws and there are police to enforce them. And it may affect your driving. You may drive within certain parameters based on that faith. Good stuff. you get a cop in your rearview mirror with these lights on, you've got conscious contact. And one is in your reality, right here, and the other one is just up in your head, where very little good is done. And my faith has to become more than faith. I have to seek an actual connection. When Carl Jung had the experience with Roland Hazard, and he told Roland, he said, "You're pretty much screwed. You're going to drink yourself to death unless your family pays for a bodyguard that knocks the alcohol out of your hand or locks you up somewhere. You're going to drink yourself to death." And he said to Carl, he said, "Oh my God, isn't there any exceptions?" And Carl said, "Well, there." And Carl had read William James's stuff, and Carl said to him, "Well, there has been rare occurrences throughout history of alcoholics of your type having these conversion experiences that were life-changing." And Roland got very excited. He said, "Well, my family, very big in the church. We have our own pew. I mean, very powerful family. I mean, we're deacons. They're all very important in the church." And he said, "I'm going to go back and join the church. I'll become a deacon. I'll do that." And Carl said to him, he said, "Going to church is great, but it will hardly provide the vital spiritual experience I'm talking about here. You need something more than faith. You need something more than religion. You're going to need a transformation. You're going to need power." I live in the desert in Las Vegas, and if you were to come and visit me in August or July, there's days it gets very hot. It gets 115 degrees. And you come and visit me, I'd take you in my car about 40 minutes outside of Las Vegas to the largest body of fresh water in the western United States, Lake Mead, huge lake. I'd drive you right up to the edge of the lake, let you get out of the car, drink the water, jump in the water, swim in the water, get you back in the car. You're still soaking wet. Your hair's wet. Your clothes are wet. Drive you 10 minutes out into the middle of the desert. Let you out in the middle of the desert with a map with 9 steps of directions on how to get back to that water so you don't die of thirst. And if you don't follow the directions to get back to that water, you will die of thirst with absolute faith that that water exists. It's not a matter of believing in the water. It's a matter of getting to the water. It's not a matter of believing in God. It's a matter of accessing the power and the grace. And the problem with guys like me is I'm blocked. There's too much of me between me and God. And that's always... See, the book says we're extreme example. My daughter is very connected to God. She's very spiritual. It's just like a part of her. She's not full of herself to the point where there's no room for God as I get. She's not an extreme example of self. I am. That is the nature of the beast. I'm so full of me, there's no room for you and there's no room for God. And so through step 3, on the other side of step 3, making this vital decision, we're going to start entering into a process of, as my grand sponsor used to say, of uncovering, discovering, and discarding the things that are blocking me so I can access the power. And we're going to find it in the last place we'll ever look. Polly.
Thanks. Thanks, Bob. Hi, everybody. My name's Polly, and I'm an alcoholic.
Polly.
Step 2. Came to believe in a power greater than myself that will restore me to sanity. I am a person who was raised in a very fundamentalist religious background. I was raised Southern Baptist. Now, I live in Florida now, and if I say Southern Baptist, everybody knows what I'm talking about. And I was raised in Texas, and I was raised right where they took the Bible Belt and gave it an extra pole. And, when they would start singing in church, there was just, I can remember these preachers in church, and they would get up behind that podium, and they would be slamming their fist, and their faces were red, and their veins were sticking out, and they were leaning into the congregation, and they were saying things like, if you've thought it, you've done it. And I mean, I was an alcoholic in the making, and I thought a lot. So it was just this enormous fear. And listening to Bob about the same thing, about God was something to fear. And I would I went to church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. We went to church. And I heard about God. I sat in Sunday school and we sang Jesus Loves Me. And I know, like Bob, I just so identify. I know that those preachers, those Sunday school teachers, my parents were talking about God loves me. But I don't know. My brain, even as a little kid, I've got that twisted thinking. I just don't hear things the way other people do. You remember that song long ago, accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative? It seems like my head accentuates the negative and eliminates the positive. There's an old guy in Fort Worth, Texas, he's in the big meeting now, and his name's Jim Williams. And he just used to say, you just line up 10 women, I'll pick the sickest one every time. And he says, I could give a talk, I could be somewhere, and I would have 200 people tell me what a good guy I am. And I'd have one person that would contradict something I say, and I'm going to go after that one guy. Because all I hear is the negative. And somewhere in my head, what I heard about God was, you're born a sinner. You're going to burn in hell. All of this, that's what I heard. And I was absolutely, and my mother saying things like, we live in a God-fearing home. And she wasn't saying that to scare me. That's not what she was doing. But what happened is that the twist in my head had this God. I could just, as a little kid, I would look and I had this picture of this God and all these robes and this long beard and this tablet, and he was floating on a cloud, and it would be like, I'm watching you. Now, of course, that right there is an indication of my selfishness and self-centeredness, and I'm already, there. But I used to just look, I'd do something, and if I told a lie, and of course, I don't know about any of you, but I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I lie when the truth sounds better. And I'll tell you right now, I catch myself telling lies, and I don't even know why I lie. And I'm 35 years sober. And I have to stop myself and say, I don't know why I said that. I don't know where that came from, but I just said it. So I am totally, God is so good to me. He ever reminds me to remain humble. I'm with Linda and Patrick are staying in the room with me, and we're having so much fun. Those two people didn't even sleep last night because I snored so loud. And God is, I thank God He keeps me right-sized. Because and I can remember as a little kid, I'd do something wrong. And I would look up and I'd say, did you see that? Just knowing that God was watching only me. He wasn't watching you. And today I see the selfish self-centeredness of that. How I always thought people were watching me. Just like what Bob said. They don't even know they're watching themselves. They're not watching me. But that's what I always thought. Somebody is watching me and checking me out. Just like the, Santa Claus thing. He's making a list and checking it twice. Gonna find out who's naughty and nice. I just always had that feeling that no matter what, I'm wrong. Today, when I work with women, I find for me that if they have no concept of God, if they're agnostic, have no religious background, it's easier in order to find a power greater than themselves and to find a God of their understanding. Because what we don't have to do is do what I had to do, and that's unlearn to relearn. Because I had to unlearn this old idea, to get rid of that old idea about God. And I come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I hear the God stuff. And it's not that I don't believe in God. It's that I don't believe God is going to help me. I come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous with a hopelessness I cannot even describe. The hopelessness of God can't possibly love me. Look what I've done. I have 2 little children that I have absolutely drugged through hell and abused physically, emotionally. I have been unable to take care of these little boys since they were 9 and 11 years old. I can't even get them up in the morning to go to school because I'm passed out. I can't put them to bed at night. I can't take care of my children. They learn to set an alarm at night, my youngest son at 9 years old, to get himself up to go to school because I can't take care of him. Later on, my husband comes back from Vietnam and he's struck with congestive heart failure. He's 36 years old and he's going to be 100% disabled from the Air Force. And I am upset because I am now going to have to take care of him. And I'm going to have to go to work and help support our family because he is not going to make enough money on this. I mean, all of it is about me. And I feel like all of this prior to sobriety is my punishment for what I'm doing. And now I'm drinking alcohol, and I've been drinking alcohol since I was 18 years old. And I come from a religion that says, thou shalt not drink. There is nothing about me that is going to make God love me. I'm so bad. I'm hopeless. I'm going to burn in hell. I might as well die. And that's how I felt. And that's what I wanted to do, is to die. I could not live the life I thought I had to live. I am so amazed at God. I'm so amazed at God. How we come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and we're these beaten down people. And, the ones that live, that are homeless, the ones that go to jail, the ones that are doing, all of this stuff. And somehow God puts these perfect people in our life, the very most perfect person that's going to help us. And for me, I'm a Baptist. I grew up Baptist. I don't know about any of you that if you realize prejudice, and in this book, in this chapter, We the Agnostics, I don't know how many times it talks about setting aside prejudice. For us to have an open mind, to set aside prejudice, to be all-inclusive. And what happens was, if you grew up in the South, when I grew up in the South in the 50s, the Baptists hated the Catholics. And the Catholics, they just, we were told they just thought they were better than everybody. And I can remember when I was going to vote for the first time, John Kennedy was running for president. And my preacher was standing up and saying, if we vote for John Kennedy, the Pope will run the United States. That's how they felt, how my religion felt about Catholics. Well, let me give you God's sense of humor. What I do is I end up in a treatment center that my husband takes me to, And this treatment center is a detox center. It's a county detox center way beneath my station. I'm an officer's wife, you know. And these people are homeless. They've been to jail. They've had divorces. They have affairs. They cuss. I didn't even know the F word till I came to AA, and I'm so good with it now. I mean, you talk about, you know, this sheltered little life. And, you know, it's like you can be a real alcoholic and not know much. And I come into this treatment center, and I love all the, you know, you sit up all night. Any of those of you who've been to detox and treatment, you know, you sit up all night and tell war stories. It's just so fun. And I learn all this stuff. And I end up having an affair in there and leaving that treatment center. Well, who's running this treatment center is a man by the name of Frank Fitzpatrick. And he's in the big meeting in the sky. And he will lead me to the most wonderful people in my life. And what happens is Frank is in this treatment center, and he has left the priesthood to marry an Asian woman. And the only reason he was a priest is because he's his mother's only child. I'm an only child. His mother's only child, and she wanted him to be a priest. And as soon as she died, he left the priesthood and married this woman. So here's Frank. Now, he's a Catholic, and he's the director of this treatment center. Frank is going to be the one when I relapse over this wonderful new romance I've had. And he brings me back into this detox. And he 12-steps me out of a motel room in Euless, Texas. And he brings me back into this treatment center. And I end up trying to commit suicide. And I end up in Dallas, Texas in a treatment center. And while I'm in that treatment center, I ask Frank if he'll sponsor me. And Frank is not only is he a Catholic priest, but he's a captain in the Navy, and he's an only child. Now, I am positive that what's wrong with my life is the Baptist church. I'm an only child. I am one of these people that created more lies than you can ever possibly imagine as a kid in order to have brothers and sisters. I had dead twin brothers. All of this, because, you know, if you're an only child, you're spoiled and, you know, all of this stuff, and you get teased a lot. And I had all of this stuff going on. And not only that, as a kid, I'm really different because I'm 72 years old. And I can tell you when I was a little girl, and I think that people who are my age, mothers did not work. That was not something that happened. But my mother worked. So I was a latchkey kid when it wasn't even popular. And I was embarrassed about that because I went home and I was by myself when I went home, and other people had their mothers there. So it was always this thing of, today I know it's all about self, but all about how I'm different. I'm not like you. I don't measure up. I mean, all of this stuff I know today are all symptoms of alcoholism because we all have them in different ways. But what happened is here I meet this man who is a captain in the Navy. Well, of course, my problem's the Air Force. If it hadn't been for the Air Force and them diagnosing me with all these mental illnesses and giving me all this medication and my husband being gone all the time, none of this would have happened. So it's their fault. And it's the Baptist church, because they told me all that stuff and made me so scared of God. I'm terrified. God can't possibly forgive me for everything I've done. Now, I don't know where I was when they were talking about, you know, when they crucified Jesus and he said, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. I didn't get all that. Somehow I'm like, Bob, I missed all that. All I knew was, you know, that I'm going to burn in hell. That's all I knew. and I'm terrified of God, and God's not going to love me. And what happens is I get this man who is a priest, and he begins to tell me he's no longer a priest, but he begins to tell me, Polly, I found God in AA. I became a priest, and what happened is all I did was my ego was bigger than ever because I had power I thought I had and didn't have, and abused it. And now I find out that I'm powerless and I need a higher power, and the God I know is not the God that I knew, is not the God I know today. I am so grateful for step 2, because what happened is, and that the people that God puts in our lives in order to show us how to do this program. And everybody has their own special angel. Everybody gets the right person put in their life that shows us what we need, what we need. When I got sober, I started coming to AA, and people would start to tell me, well, you went to treatment, so you have a $10,000 big book. Well, I guess it's $30,000 now. But back then it was, and I'm sitting there thinking, I can't even get sober right. Here I'm a person who's gone to all these treatment centers, and, I'd come into and hear, well, all I've ever done is AA. And I'm like, well, I'm already screwed, and I haven't even started. I've already done it wrong. So, you get, all of this just comes in such twisted, it just gets in here and it's all twisted. And we're going to find ways to make it not right and make it wrong. And I'm just so grateful for the angels that we get in our life that are brought in. And Frank would tell me, he said, you know what? I had to go to a naval hospital as a captain in the Navy and have all these enlisted people in group tell me how sick I am. And, and I understood that because I have a military background. So I understood all that. And here a man in the military is given to me, and I asked Frank to be my sponsor. And Frank starts telling me things, and I keep saying, but God won't forgive me. He won't forgive me. What do? Don't you have to go to purgatory? Aren't you a Catholic? And he says, none of that stuff. I don't have that God anymore, Polly. I don't have that God anymore. God loves me. God loves me. And he would just say things to me, Polly, just believe that I believe. Set aside that what Bob started off this morning with the set aside prayer. Set aside what you think you know. And in a sense, that's what Frank was telling me way back then. Set aside what you think you know, because what we're going to do is we're going to relearn something else. And it's like Bob says, we're going to be here to turn on the juice. And what happens is what Frank would start doing for me is he would start pointing out what I call God shots. Just showing me all these God shots that we have. One of the things is he'd say, Polly, don't you think it's amazing that you were in an ambulance on the way to the hospital, and in that ambulance you were pronounced dead on arrival. You were pronounced dead, and you arrive at that hospital, and shortly thereafter they discover you're not dead. What do you think that is? What do you think? And just start to point out all these God shots and all the ways that God shows us so much grace, so that you can come to believe in a power greater than yourselves. And on page 47, in the second paragraph on page 47. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe, or is even willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. Wow. That promise, I have it underlined and yellowed. That is the promise right there. If I am even willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself. And one of the things that I love in our history that we get to read about in the Oxford group, and all the people who didn't believe in God, they would use God in different ways. A group of drunks, and that's God. That's because it's more than one person. Like Bob said, you want a higher power? Go hit a cop. You're going to have a higher power for a little while. And, get this group of drunks, and that's more than me. And these drunks are staying sober. That's a power greater than me. And it was those kind of things that started to bring me around. And the God shots, and seeing, here, most of us are sitting here, and we should have been dead, but we're not. The God shots that we have, and how God just, as the book says, resurrects us. That power that can restore me to sanity. And I'm, of course, certain that, I know I'm an alcoholic. I caught alcoholism in the last treatment. I just always thought I was mentally ill. What's wrong with me is I'm mentally ill. I've been told it enough times. I take enough medication. I'm mentally ill. What I'm so grateful for today is that I have found an antidote for mental illness. I'm one of these people that can be depressed in a nanosecond. All I need is a few minutes in my head. Now, you may not be as sick as me. And sometimes I hear people say in AA, well, they don't do any service, they don't sponsor anybody, they don't do anything, and they stay sober. And what I say to women that ask me those questions, sweetheart, they're just probably not as sick as you are. Maybe they're just not as sick as you are. But I know that I am a real alcoholic. And the thing that saves me and the antidote for depression is to work with others. It's what Bill has said. It's what he did. I used to read everything I could on Bill, and I'm insane. But I find out that if I share that insanity with another woman who's just as insane as me, I stay better. How does that work? Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. But what happens is that by doing that, and that's what I had to do. And I hear this all the time in Alcoholics Anonymous. You hear this people say, come on in to Alcoholics Anonymous and let us love you till you can love yourself. Well, I'd like to give you another twist on that. Let us come in here and love you till you can love somebody else. Because I can tell you, if I were sitting here today waiting to love myself, I wouldn't be sober yet. Because on any given day, I cannot like myself. On any given day, I can be down on myself because I am so judgmental of myself. The thing that helps me feel better about me is working with another alcoholic. And what happens for me is the minute I start talking with her and I start sharing in this program and I start listening to what's going on with her, a magic happens to me that changes my life. And that's what I began to do. And he said, if you are 15 minutes sober, share that 15 minutes with the person who walks in the door. And we are never too new not to help another alcoholic. If we had waited for, you need to be a year to sponsor, you need to be this, you need to be that, none of us would be here. Ebby was 2 months sober when he carried the message to Bill. I wonder how many steps he'd worked. But he carried the message to another alcoholic. We can always carry the message. So what started to restore me to sanity and what started to give me the power was going into Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and doing what I heard Clancy say in my early sobriety, and that's take actions contrary to the way you feel. Just do something for somebody else, if it's just picking up a coffee cup, if it's just doing something. But we've got to find a way. I love Bob's term. I steal it from him, and that is to turn on the juice. We got to turn on the juice. And the only way I know to turn on the juice is take an action contrary to the way I feel. A new girl came into our group last week. And she came in, and I wanted to make her a part of. And I said, you see Dixie over here? I said, Dixie's coming up on 9 months of sobriety, and she's the setup person. I said, I bet you can help her set up. And Dixie doesn't have a car, and she doesn't have a car. And I said, okay, I pick up Dixie every Monday night. I'll pick up you. You two are going to be the setup people. I'm going to sit on the front porch and rock. I'm only the driver. You guys are the setup people. And already, she's now 3 weeks sober. And she feels a part of that group because she's doing something. And she's getting turned on to the juice. Because she's in the power of that group. She's in the power. And today I get it. I mean, this is, today I understand that where two or more are gathered, there is God. And, today I understand that I can sit in my chair in my living room and get my little books, and I can read, and I can talk to God, and I can be turned on to the power. But I didn't used to could do that. Because God was too scary for me, and He wouldn't love somebody like me. But what happens is we come into these rooms and we come to believe. I loved talking with Shannon. She says that she's got this group that they go to, and a lot of the people that go to the morning meeting won't go to the Monday morning meeting because they're going to talk about God because they use the Came to Believe book. We're going to talk about God. And this book keeps talking about God. And when you come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, we're going to talk about God. God is the answer. God is the answer. And what's really wonderful is the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says here, are all inclusive. We can believe in whatever kind of God, and I think that that's the magic of the book. Is when we talk about in the third step is God as I understand Him. Because we come from all walks of life. So what I am so grateful for is the chapter to the agnostic. Because what happened for a person like me, who was brought up in a faith like me, that comes into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and is in such a state of hopelessness, because I don't believe that there's any way that God is going to love me because of all the things I've done, what I've already done. And I ended up doing, in my opinion, worse things sober. When I got sober, I was doing worse things. But what happens is that somebody like me, with that kind of feeling about God, can find a God that is so forgiving that He has forgiven me. My children have forgiven me. My husband, who I'm married to today, knows all about me before he married me, watched me act out in AA, and loves me. and doesn't hold any of that against me. That a person who's that afraid of God could find a God that is so merciful. And all this time when I came to you, I thought this God only judged. And this book told me, set aside your judgment. Set aside that judgment. And what I have found in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, oh, we'll judge. Come on, we're human. We talk about, Dr. Bob said we talk about each other amongst ourselves. And, there's nothing, sometimes I had one of my biggest character defects was gossip. There is nothing more fun than talking about people. And I've had to learn not to do that. Because, what happens is I've learned what goes around comes around. If I'm going to talk about you, I know that this is a spiritual axiom. The next thing I'm going to know is I'm going to hear you talk how all the things you've been saying about me. And today I just don't want the repercussions of saying stuff about people. Set aside that judgment. And what I've learned in step 2 was the beginning of that came to believe in that power. Came to believe in a power greater than myself that could restore me to sanity. And what that power is it's merciful. It's loving. No matter what we do, we can be forgiven. We hang out with people who are murderers. All of this stuff. And guess what? We can forgive. I'm going to tell one little story. I'm going to get back to Bob about forgiveness. I sponsor a woman who has had a child late in life. And she's very protective of this child. She homeschools her. She's very, very protective of this child. And because of her own background, she's always afraid that someone is going to harm this child, sexually abuse her or harm her in one way, because she's so terrified. And one day, and she's always looking online for sex offenders in her neighborhood. And God is so amazing. What happened is that she calls me on the phone and she says, this sex offender is in my AA meeting. What am I going to do? And I said, well, I guess, and she's a newcomer. I said, well, I guess you carry her the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. She's already, served her time. You can't kick people out of AA. That's the magic. You can't kick people. We can't kick people out of AA. And she goes on, and this lady's in the group, and all of a sudden I get a call. What am I going to do? She's asked me to sponsor her. And I said, well, my darling, knowing God the way I know God, I'm not sure how you know God, but I think God is about ready to give you a huge lesson in forgiveness. Which is exactly, of course, what happened. And that she got to learn stuff about her and what happened to this lady and a lot of stuff that she never understood. And if any of you do Al-Anon, there's a term that we use in Al-Anon that says, hurt people. And that's what happens. God is so amazing. And we can come to believe in this power that can restore us to sanity and all those insane thoughts and how merciful and how forgiving God is. Bob.
Let's take an 8-minute, 48-second break.